This has been an extraordinary year filled with too many stresses to count. It's important to your health and to those around you to check in with yourself and others to make sure everyone is okay. This holiday season can be especially stressful, but remember that you don't have to go through any of this alone. There are folks who support you and want to see you okay so that we all come out on the other side of this together. Don't forget that, and don't be afraid to speak up if you need a hand. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and this week on the program, it's Mitch Steele. He's the brewmaster of New Realm Brewing in Georgia and Virginia, and we're talking beer styles, food pairings, and beer philosophy. Joining me on the line right now is Justin Clark of Cigar City Brewing, which is this episode's sponsor, and we're thankful for that. Justin, let's talk about Fancy Papers IPA. It's a relatively new beer, or wider distributed beer, for the brewery. What are the origins of it?
Yeah, so we were having a lot of fun doing hazy IPAs, tap room exclusive, just real small batches at our tap room. And we wanted to be able to provide something out to our distribution footprint at large. So after experimenting and trials, we were able to come up with something that we feel will be very consistent, high quality, and shelf stable, which sometimes isn't found in the hazy beer category. And so Fancy Papers was originally scheduled to just be a seasonal release for us, but we're very fortunate to have such great reception from our retail partners. And the demand was there that we've actually made this a year-round beer now for us.
The brewery is obviously known for High Lie IPA, which helped put the brewery on the map. For those who haven't had the chance to try Fancy Papers yet, what can beer drinkers, beer lovers expect from the flavor and the aroma of this hazy IPA?
Certainly, yeah, we definitely wanted to make sure that this beer stands on its own and is going, a little bit of a different direction than Highlight IPA. You'll definitely notice, more melon, some lime leaf. There'll be some pineapple qualities in Fancy Papers, and certainly true to the hazy beer category. There'll definitely be less bitterness and a little bit lower body than you might find in our Highlight IPA.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have more with you, Justin, at the end of the show, but for now, I'm going to invite everybody to go and check out cigarcitybrewing.com to learn more about Fancy Papers as well as all of the brewery's other beers. Mitch Steele is a brewmaster that everyone looks up to. He's had a storied career in beer, worked at prominent breweries, developed some of the beers we still know and drink today. And these days, he's the brewmaster at New Realm Brewing, a company he helped found and that operates breweries in Georgia and Virginia. He's a teacher that many in the brewing industry turn to for advice and for inspiration. But Mitch, he's earned his place in the first name club of brewers, is still very much a student. He's curious, he's a relentless tinkerer, and he's always on the hunt for new flavors, new ideas, and ways to make his beers the very best that they can be. There's a lot to learn from him, and he always seems happy to share. Because I know there's so many breweries who start in the industry today who immediately begin harboring thoughts of opening their own place. I wondered that when he started his career, if he had similar thoughts. Mitch spoke to me from the brewery in Atlanta. Here's our conversation. When you started your brewing career, you worked for established breweries, places that had been around before you and maybe had a bit of a reputation. And I'm curious, when you were approached with the idea of New Realm, what went through your mind as far as venturing into the unknown? Was there any of that?
Oh, definitely. My first real brewing job was at a brew pub and a startup brew pub in Hollister, and I worked there. And we were so small, I was only part time there. But when I went through that, I wanted to, at some point, I wanted to really learn about brewing and brewing science and managing a brewery and doing all that. And that's when I left San Andreas. But when New Realm approached me after I had been with, the Anheuser-Busch and Stone for so long, the one thing that really kept popping into my head is that I've never had the opportunity to really build something from scratch, from ground zero. And, and that included, the branding, the beers, the kind of overall philosophy of the brewery, those kind of things. And I never really had and that was the thing that kept coming up, was like, this might be my only chance to really do this and it seemed, not like a big risk, because I knew what our investment team looked like. And
Yeah.
so, and then the other part of this was going to Atlanta and going to a place where craft beer hadn't developed as far as it has in San Diego or Denver or wherever. It wasn't, although there was a good beer scene here, it wasn't that well established, and it was kind of fun to think about getting in when it was starting to take off like it has.
When you talk about, though, being at Stone, being at AB, and not having a hand in everything like you do now, was that an itch that had been developing professionally for you for a while that you wanted to scratch, or when these conversations with New Realm started, did they start to creep up for the first time?
Yeah, it's more the latter. I wasn't looking to leave Stone, and I wasn't looking to do anything else. I was having the time of my life there. But, um, when Carrie and Bob, and Carrie's our CEO and Bob's our chief marketing and sales officer, when they approached me about this, I hemmed and hawed for a long time. It wasn't like it was an easy decision, because I really did enjoy my time at Stone. But, that's when it really started becoming real to me that this might be a chance to start something, and really build something. And so that wasn't something that had been in my head for a long time. That's something that kind of popped up after we had the first conversation.
I find that so interesting, because I talk to new brewers, young brewers, folks who have been in the business for 5 minutes or so, and if they're an assistant somewhere or whatever, a lot of them are sort of harboring dreams of ambition of opening up their own place at some point. And I guess I'm wondering if that's just the way that craft beer has grown in the U.S., that it is possible for anybody to open up their own place, now versus when you got into it. And that's not me calling you an old man. It's more just, I'm wondering if it's like a situational, generational thing.
I maybe to a certain extent. I do think that there are a lot of brewers, that would relish the idea of having 100% creative control over what they're brewing. And I think that's really where it stands into it. I think, I think the good thing for me, or the thing that really impacted me, was that I worked for two very established companies, and I know how hard they had to work to really get started, and all the stuff you have to deal with that nobody thinks about, when you're running a brewery, all that background, bureaucratic, legal stuff that you got to deal with. And I don't think, somebody who's brewing, as an assistant brewer or a head brewer or something like that, who's taken a lot of direction, may not have an appreciation for all the garbage that goes along with running a brewery. I don't know. I mean, I knew that was probably my biggest fear going into here, is just having to deal with that on a more, in-person level than I had to do at Stone. At Stone, I ran the brewing department, and I reported to an owner, and I had so much creative freedom and control that it was just a wonderful experience for me. But when you take on kind of a founding of a new brewery, you got to take on a lot more than just making great beer and running a production operation. You got to start thinking about the building and the rent and all that stuff that just drives me crazy.
I mean, you say crazy though. Are there things that you've encountered in your time now at New Realm, from the announcement to the build out to opening and to now, that you found yourself joyful about, that you found yourself excited about, that you didn't think that you might be at some point, or that took you by surprise?
Just simple things like naming the brewery and naming the beers was fun. We really struggled to name this brewery, and it was looking back on it, I know we were frustrated at the time because we had some self-imposed rules. number one, all three of us had veto power. So if one of us didn't like a name, it was out. It just was removed from consideration. And the other rule that we put on ourselves was if somebody else had used the name, whether it was for a beer or a brewery, we weren't going to explore it. And so I have a stack of paper about half an inch thick of all these brewery names that we were trying to come up with. And it was really hard, but looking back on it, it was a very creative process, and that part of it was really fun. And dealing with dealing with a marketing company and trying to figure out how we're going to present ourselves to the public and what we want to try and do was a lot of fun for me. I think it can be very frustrating as a brewer when you have preconceived notions of what things should be, but the creative process was really fun. And then designing a restaurant, I've never done that before, but that was a fascinating process, sitting with architects and construction managers and going through that whole bit and trying to figure out the best way to have flow through the restaurant. And I think, the one thing that sticks out in my mind is initially we put the restrooms right by the door to the kitchen.
Isn't there an old adage about that?
Yeah, probably. But, it's just a learning experience, and you're like, okay, that's a bad idea. And several people told us it was a bad idea. And it's like, okay. And you listen to these people that have done it before and have experience, and you're like, okay, I'm learning something.
When you were thinking about the restaurant, though, and you're thinking about recipe development, how much did you want the two to go hand in hand?
You mean as far as the food recipes?
Yeah, the food recipes, but also the beer. Did you want synergy or?
Yeah, we did. We had a chef who was we hired pretty early on who had some dishes that he was really fond of, and we looked at those in the context of our beers. And I think the beer came first. So we knew we were going to have an IPA. We knew we were going to have a lager of some sort, which turned out to be a Pilsner. And we had some other kind of more classic styles because I mistakenly thought that they might do really well in Atlanta because Atlanta wasn't IPA country like San Diego was.
Like what? What's a good example of that?
Of the beer?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a pale ale that was phenomenal. We had a golden ale that was really nice. But in the year and a half to 2 years that we spent designing and building this facility, a lot changed in the brewing world, and we had to kind of rethink things after we got started. The one thing that came across very loud and clear from our first customers that came into the restaurant was that our beers were on the bitter side, and a lot of people didn't want that.
As somebody coming from San Diego, though, was that just daggers to the heart?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean that's almost like one of the worst things you could say to a dyed-in-the-wool San Diego brewer is, oh, your pale ale is too bitter.
Yeah.
That's just mean. Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean? You're getting fresh IPA for the first time in your life, San Diego style IPA. Why aren't you just falling all over it, But hey, it is what it is. And, and we responded to that. And, I think the one thing that's really, really cool was developing, just a way to listen to what our customers, our guests are telling us about the beers. And several things have come out of that. It's like we always have a dark beer on tap because there's always somebody that wants one. We got into spirits because we had a lot of people coming to our place that weren't beer drinkers, but they wanted the meal and they wanted to hang out with their friends. So, it's modeled, our approach has evolved, as we've learned, but yeah, getting back to your original question though, we had this nice lineup of beers, and then I tasted them with our chef at the time, Julio, and he created a couple of specific dishes to go with the beers. But really, we just wanted to make sure that we had a beer that went with each dish, that there was something that people would really enjoy drinking along with the food. And I think we had a pretty good cross section of beers when we started, so it wasn't an issue, or wasn't anything we had to put a whole lot of effort into.
Will that pale ale ever make a comeback, do you think?
I don't see it. I would love to brew it again. It was really good. We were, our head brewer here in Atlanta, Tyler, has spent a few years at Sierra Nevada, and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is like one of those, seminal beers for me.
Oh yeah.
And just to be able to brew something kind of like that, that was inspired by Sierra Nevada Pale Ale was a real treat for me. And, and we didn't try to copy the recipe, but we tried to make a beer that definitely showed the inspiration. And, it did well for a while, but nobody's drinking pale ales right now. It's just one of those things, unless it's a hazy pale ale.
Yeah. So you've had the benefit now of seeing, I guess, the last 9 or 10 months under COVID, and what's moving and what's not. And have you seen consumer shifts in what's selling and what there's demand for versus maybe what was selling and what there was demand for pre-pandemic?
Absolutely. It's been a huge shift in a lot of different levels. I think, the shift from being 50% draft to being 85% cans was something that we struggled with, but we were able to make it work. But what we're seeing from buying habits is that a lot of people seem to be gravitating towards beers that they're comfortable with and in larger quantities. So like 12 packs or 15 packs seem to be really moving. Beers that are, beers that are a risk, or maybe something you've never had before and you're not sure you're going to like it. I think there are beer buyers that would stay away from those in the current situation, whereas, a year ago they may have gone out of their way to find it and try it. But people are taking less risks with their beers. And I think we've seen with some of our core brands, we've seen them tail off a little bit, and then other ones.
Are you being evacuated?
No, sorry.
No,
that's a brew house alarm. So it's just
one of your IPAs was too bitter, so the alarm starts going off.
Yeah. I was hoping you couldn't hear that.
No, it's all good. For audience reference, before we started, Mitch and I were talking about like interruptions and emails and doing all sorts of hearing background noises while recording during a pandemic and from home and offices and etc. So that was super fitting, actually. That was going through. It's almost as if you planned it from our pre-conversation. But yeah.
Right. Now I'll just have them go start up the mill now. That'll be real fun.
Good, and my neighbor's going to start mowing his lawn in the middle of December, so that's just perfect. Yeah.
Awesome.
But I interrupted you. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, we're seeing beer buyers take fewer risks. One of the things that's really done well for us is a mixed 12 pack that we launched last winter, right when this all started, and we've been doing a new one every 3 months, and we have 2 of our best-selling beers in it every time, and then we have kind of a seasonal beer, and then what we call a treasure hunt beer, a beer that we've never put into a can before. And so when you're buying a 12 pack, you're getting 12 beers, and if 3 of them are something you've never tried before, it's a little bit less of a risk. And I think people have responded to that. It's been pretty neat to see how well these have done.
The variety pack is such an interesting thing because for a long time, a lot of the larger brewers were doing it, and some of them still are. And smaller brewers tried for a while, and then it sort of went by the wayside, I think, as consumer preferences changed, where people were just happy to buy a 4-pack or a 6-pack of whatever was sort of new and flashy. But the allure of a variety pack, I think, is still there for a lot of folks, even if they haven't, thought about them for a while. And I'm trying to think of the right way to frame this question, just simply because there's not a ton of breweries that I know where if I saw a variety pack that was like, hey, here's something that we haven't canned before, that I would have the trust to, plunk down $15 or $20 or whatever a variety pack's going for these days, because there was an unknown. And I don't necessarily feel that way with your beers, because of your reputation. And,
Well,
well, I guess so. I guess the sort of question is like the trust that you establish between the brewery and the consumer through quality. How often are you reinforcing that with your team?
oh, we try to make it just kind of an overriding principle with everything that we do. We have, for a brewery our size, I think our quality program is really strong. We were able to invest in some good equipment so that we're not just using calculations to figure out where our beer numbers are. We're actually measuring things. We're in the process of implementing a very robust sensory analysis program. And that's something that we wanted to do for a long time, but we finally had the staffing and the resources to really put it together. So that's been a big project this year. And
Can you talk about that just for folks who don't know what goes into like a sensory analysis program? Can you just sort of give like a quick overview?
For sure, yeah. So sensory analysis is tasting the beer, and it involves not only tasting beer but tasting water that you use for brewing to make sure that it's clean. It's tasting the beers throughout the fermentation to make sure that off flavors aren't forming. It's tasting the beer and approving the beer before you put it into a package, and making sure you have a process, a check off that the beer actually tastes like what it's supposed to. And then we taste beer every day in the brewery, and we're doing some process checks through sensory analysis. So, like, there's a test called a diacetyl force test, and you heat up a sample of the beer, and if it forms any butter flavor, then you don't chill the beer down. You let it sit on the yeast for a little while, those kind of things. And
Yeah.
what we're implementing now is getting more people than the brewers involved in tasting our beers, and we're going through a process where eventually we'll have monthly panels that are very cross-functional, where people taste our beers and rank the different attributes of the beer, whether the hop is lemony or whether it's more peach or apricot, or whether the bitterness is higher or lower, or that kind of thing. And, these things take a while to get established, but once you start building up data, it can be a really valuable tool to make sure you're understanding that, whether your beer is shifting a little bit, which as a day-to-day brewer, you may not pick up on, but, trained tasters might.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge time investment, and it's really an important part. And I tell our brewing team all the time, I said, tasting is the most important part of the day. And I do believe that, you've got to taste your beer, and you've got to taste it all along the brewing and fermenting process.
But you also have to be honest with yourself while you're tasting it. I've always been stunned when I've gone to breweries and I've been served a beer, and I've gone on, on and on about this on this show and others before, but like, somebody serving a beer with diacetyl in it and knowing that there's diacetyl in it and not being ashamed of that. Yeah. So, I mean, there's got to be like a thing of, as a brewer, being honest with yourself as well, which can, I imagine, be difficult at times because it's something that you created, something that you care about.
Yeah, it's a matter of degree, and it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, to me, if we miss on bitterness or color, that's not the biggest deal breaker in the world. But an off flavor like diacetyl, we would not be serving the beer. And that's something that our whole team knows, and our bartenders know it as well. The people that are serving our beers, if they taste something weird in the beer, they know to give me a call, and I'll run out there and taste it and make sure that it's okay or not. But from the brewer's perspective, I think, from my point of view, the subjectivity comes in when it's a stylistic question, and I think that's where brewers sometimes will get a little defensive.
Are you a style purist?
No, I'm not. It depends on the beer. I mean, I think there's room for doing that, and I certainly believe in the value of brewing to style. But I also believe that the only way breweries are going to be successful is they innovate, and sometimes innovation requires veering off of style guidelines. And so, I think there's the way I've approached brewing is there's elements of both. There are times when we want to brew something strictly to style, like our German lagers are beers that would fall into that category. We want to brew a beer that somebody would be familiar with who has had a Dunkel in Germany or a Helles in Germany. But when we're brewing IPAs, if we go outside of the parameters of bitterness or color or something like that, we tend not to lose any sleep over that.
That makes sense. Because you've been, I've had some of the beers that you've made this year, and one that sort of stopped me dead in my tracks, and I talk about this at in the intro to this interview, was this Belgian quad that you made in rum barrels.
Yeah,
and I mean, it just. I think I actually texted you afterwards because I was just so stunned by the complexity of it, but also the novelty of it as well. When you're thinking about recipe formulation, when you're thinking about flavors and ideas, and I had it up just a minute ago, but the philosophy of New Realm on the website is rethink tradition, bend the rules, reconfigure boundaries. When you're thinking about creating a new recipe that fits into those three things, where do you start?
Well, every beer has a different story, and with regards to the quadruple, that whole idea came about because I had an opportunity to buy some rum barrels, and I'd never aged beer in rum barrels before, and so I went ahead and bought them, and then I reached out to Tyler and Evan and say, what kind of beer do you think would go well in here? And I don't remember which one of the three of us came up with the idea of a Belgian quadruple, but once that idea came to the table, that was it, and it's like, okay, this is, with all that, the dried fruit and all that kind of character you get from a good quadruple. We just thought the rum flavors would really pair well majestically with that. And I think that beer worked. I think that was our best barrel aged beer that we released last year. But in general, every beer is different. The motivation for brewing it is different. We have a series of double IPAs, and we've got some parameters that we've been asked to hold to, but we have a lot of free reign with the hopping on those. And we try to put unusual hop pairings together and that kind of thing.
Wait, what kind of pairings?
Hop.
Okay.
So yeah.
Sorry. I thought there was a P at the beginning of that word, and I was like,
oh no.
It's like we're going down the legalization route. All right, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, not yet.
In a few years, that's going to be a big thing. I'm going to be getting endless PR pitches of what marijuana goes best with your IPA. So yeah.
It's an interesting world. And we pay attention to all that kind of stuff. I mean, you have to. Whether you decide to do it or not, just being aware and being ready to do it if you want to. I think that's been a big part of what we've tried to do is, look at what's becoming popular and get on it quickly. And I think that's probably the biggest thing with innovation that we've tried to do. Brewed IPA, right? A good example of a beer style that came and went in the flash.
Yeah.
But we were the first brewery in Georgia to brew one. We put one on the plan as soon as I learned about them, and I think that has some importance. Doing beers, a low carb, low calorie IPA is something else that we did very early on. It's just one of those things that I think, it's very hard to have a successful beer if you're if you're coming in 2 years late to the party, right? And you know, it happens, but it just makes the people in sales, it makes their jobs more difficult, you know. And that's why I'm a big believer in, you know, if I learn something new, or I learn that somebody's doing something that's really innovative, you know, I embrace it and explore it. And I will say, you know, I was skeptical of hazy IPAs and their popularity, and you know, and I don't say I was really vocal about it, but I didn't hide my feelings about it. And then, you know, as we started to brew one, and as we monitored that beer through the fermentation and saw what was going on with the hop flavor change during fermentation, it opened my eyes to that style and how really innovative it really was, and how different it was from anything else that was being brewed. And you know, so I have an appreciation for that kind of stuff. And it doesn't matter whether I drink or enjoy the beer or not. You know, if it's something that's innovative and that people will like, then I want to explore it.
Are there styles that you won't make?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything. I don't think so. I mean, you know, I mean, you know, I'm not going to make a low-cal or low-cal American lager, probably, just because that's not in our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
You know, if we're going to do something low-cal, we want it to be pretty full flavored. I can't think of a beer I wouldn't brew. Now, certainly that wasn't the case, you know, in my past job at Stone. There were certain beer styles, anything that was kind of a classic low alcohol beer style was off the table
Right.
at Stone.
It was just a non-starter. Like, you couldn't even bring that up in a meeting.
Oh no, yeah, you know, Greg was classic. Every time I brought something like that up, he just yawned very loudly. And I'm like, okay, I got the message.
All right,
I'll move on.
Sorry, you don't like making money. All right, yeah.
You know, but here at New Realm, I think because, you know, we have a very diverse group of people coming into our restaurants, we can brew anything that we think might do okay in the restaurant, and try it out. And I've enjoyed that, you know, and it's been fun to be able to brew a beer like a Munich Dunkel. You know, that was the beer that we had no plans on doing anything with. And Tyler, it was Tyler's recipe, and he brewed a 5-barrel batch of it on our pilot system, and it sold out in like 2 days. And
wow,
I'm like, okay.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it just went. And so we're like, okay, there's something here. And we started brewing 20-barrel batches of it for our restaurants. And it's consistently in the top 5 of the beer sales in the restaurants.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's like, okay, there are people that want classic styles coming to our restaurants, and that's wonderful.
Do they know that they're classic styles? Are they? Do you think people are ordering it because it's like, oh, I'm familiar with this, or because the way that you're describing the beer and then the follow through on the taste is just appealing to them?
I think it's more the former, actually.
Really?
And I know in Virginia Beach, you know, where we opened up that restaurant and tasting room in Virginia Beach, you know, that town is so heavily military that we had a lot of people coming in who had spent time in Germany and drank those beers. And
Makes sense.
We got the feedback that, hey, you know, this tastes like what I was drinking in Germany. I'm going to keep drinking it.
Huh. That's a great compliment.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear something like that. I'm absolutely thrilled that beer has done as well as it has for us. And, you know, it's probably not going to do much in distribution. We, you know, before COVID hit, we had a couple of accounts that were pouring it full time. You know, but we never expected much more than that from it. And certainly it's not a beer that we're going to put out into cans and put on shelves in beer stores. But, you know, it's nice to be able to have that kind of a beer in our restaurant, because I like it, and every once in a while that's the beer I'm going to go for. And you know, my big thing with the restaurants is to make sure that we have a beer for anybody that comes in, you know, whether they're a hardcore craft drinker, whether they're an IPA hophead, whether they like hazies, whether they like dark ales. I just want to have a nice mix of beers so that there's chances are there's something that somebody will like who has very, very narrow likes in beer, and I think that's worked for us.
And you're doing hard seltzers too.
We are. And that's another good example of something that I was kind of like going, what are we doing here? Are we really going to do this? And I started researching how to make them, and I talked with some people who had made them for a long time, and it made me realize there were some real challenges with fermenting these sugar water liquids. There's no nutrients in there, nothing for the yeast to feed on but the sugar, which is like if you imagine a human being just eating nothing but sugar. That's kind of what the yeast does too. They collapse, and so there were some real tricks to figuring out how to do it, and it's been fun. They've been selling really well in our restaurants. We're going to release them in cans this spring because they've done so well for us. And it's like one of those things. Am I going to be one of those brewers that says I absolutely will not do that? I've never really been that way. If I see value in doing something, I will.
And you can always stop if it doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And these have worked for us, and they give, in Georgia, when you have a production brewery and a restaurant, you are not legally allowed to serve anything made by anybody else. And so we can't serve wine, we can't serve guest beers, anything like that in our restaurant. And the seltzers have given us an alternative drink for people that don't want beer, and it's worked out really well for us. And I certainly see the business side of that, the value of that. And seltzers are, they're kind of their own animal. It's just something different. I don't really drink them. I'm a beer guy, but they do well in our restaurants, and people are happy we're making them. So
yeah, they hit the spot sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, they are refreshing. I get it, and if you have a good one, and there's some really good ones out there, and if you have one on a summer day, it's a pretty nice drink.
More with Mitch in just a minute, but first, my thanks to Cigar City Brewing Company for sponsoring this episode. Check out Fancy Papers IPA. Fresh cut grass and tangerine on the nose are complemented by a white wine grape and bread-like aromas. Flavors of guava, melon, and lime leaf present themselves harmoniously with Sauvignon Blanc and a bready malt flavor, playing supporting roles. Learn more at cigarcitybrewing.com. In thinking about You got into brewing in the late 1980s, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So in thinking about the last 30 or so years of how the beer industry has evolved and different trends and fits and starts and chasing trends and trends being established and things coming and going like brewed IPA and now everybody thinking about hard seltzer or low cal or even non-alcoholic beers as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think beer will evolve? Where do you think we're headed right now as far as an overall American beer industry? Is it going to be less focused on beer itself, and we're going to see breweries become beverage companies? Is there a return to something else? You're a thoughtful guy, so I'm just sort of curious as to where you're thinking things could go.
Yeah, that's obviously that's something that I think about all the time, and kind of scratching my head on where the beer industry might be going. I honestly don't know. I do think we're in a cycle right now where if you're a brewery and you're looking at doing things that aren't beer, you may be positioning yourself for better success than a brewery that just sticks to beer and sticks to their guns. And the seltzers are a case in point, and that's you're right. I have been in this business for a while, and I actually started really becoming involved in craft beer back in the early 80s when I first tasted Sierra Nevada, and I kind of realized that's what I want to do. And even though I wasn't in the business for 5 years after I graduated college, I certainly kept my eye on it and followed it and visited brew pubs all the time. There's a couple things that I see that I think are always going to be in play. And number one is innovation. I mean, this whole industry was built on brewers taking what had come before them and building on those and veering off from those and that kind of thing, you know. And I mean, you know, the whole American IPA that evolved into West Coast IPA and double IPA and then the Northeast hazy IPAs. I think that's going to fuel the business continually. I think, you know, people that are creative and come up with new ways of doing things or creating new flavor profiles I think that's always going to be there. I think, you know, people will always drink beer. I think, you know,
You hope, yeah.
I don't think the business is going away, but I think the business is changing right now, and it's hard to navigate. It really is kind of hard to figure out where things are going. And, you know, we have a beer I really love in our portfolio, a Pilsner, that's won a lot of awards and does very well in competitions. And people were drinking a lot of it when we first started, and we're seeing people kind of moving away from it. And, you know, and I think, you know, the distributors, you know, call it rotation nation, you know, and beer drinkers are very fickle. And, you know, I'm hoping we get to the point where that kind of having to have something shiny and new every month kind of settles down a little bit. It just makes brewers' lives a little bit easier and more stable. But I don't know, you know, a lot of beer styles have been talked about being the next big thing, and I don't see anything. I don't see anything kicking IPA off the perch. You know, I just don't see it happening anytime. Probably not till after I retire. You know.
Yeah. No, I know there's folks who hope it'll be lager or something along those lines, but I'm sort of with you on that as well. I feel like I asked the wrong question before, so I wanted to sort of come back to when I asked if there's anything that you wouldn't make. I feel like the question I probably should have asked was, is there a style that still vexes you that you're trying to perfect? Because I don't think I've ever had a bad beer all of the beers that I've had of yours, I've thoroughly enjoyed, because I know that you're putting a lot of time and effort and knowledge into them. But I'm wondering that in your 30 plus years now of brewing, is there a style of beer that you feel like you haven't been able to get your hands around yet to make it in a way that makes you happy?
Yeah, it's the Belgian Abbey or Trappist ales. I think that I just have never been 100% satisfied with the result, and you know, looking for the yeast that, you know, isn't too clove focused in managing the fermentation. I just don't feel like I've ever just 100% nailed it, you know. And I remember talking with another really well-known brewer a while back, a few years ago, about.
You can drop names on the show if you want.
Well, it was Walt Dickinson at Wicked Weed.
Okay.
You know, before they.
All right. Well, maybe you shouldn't have, but yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's...
But I mean, you know, we were really good friends for a while, and I was talking with him about Belgian beers, and we kind of agreed that, you know, there's this holy grail out there for brewers to capture that yeast character that you get in an authentic Belgian Abbey ale that is very hard to get with American produced Belgian yeast strains. And you know, and they're close, but they're not quite there yet. And I've never felt like we've totally nailed it, you know. I just so that's probably my holy grail, the beer style that challenges me the most right now. Is probably, you know, brewing a nice Belgian pale ale or a double or something like that. I think we've got a pretty good triple. I think we're getting there, you know, and we just released a triple in 16-ounce cans that I'm pretty happy with, but still I want to tweak it, you know.
You're putting all these beers in cans. Isn't there a shortage happening right now?
Yeah, it's rough. there's a lot of things going on with can supply, but I think that I'm on the Brewers Association supply chain subcommittee, so we talk about this all the time, and the people in the Brewers Association are getting some really great information on the whys of these kind of situations. But bottom line, every brewer's moving to cans. With COVID, the can demand has gone skyrocketing. And, with the popularity of seltzers, which are all in cans, and energy drinks that are all in cans, there's just not enough manufacturing capacity to supply all the needs in the United States right now. And, there's a lot of brewers that are starting to look for cans elsewhere, Mexico and Asia. And, it's just one of those things where, even well-established brewers who have been buying direct from the manufacturers for a long time and aren't going through a broker are getting shorted on their contracts. And it's a scary situation, and I think it's going to be with us for a while. There's a lot of talk about Ball, who's a can manufacturer, building new plants in the United States, and they are doing it. But the word we're hearing is that most of that capacity will be committed to seltzer cans.
That's amazing.
And so we've been telling people, don't assume that this is going to go away in a few months. This is going to be an issue for a long time.
So is there a concern if people are trying to source cans from non-traditional sources here in the U.S.? Like I think about like some of like the manufacturing equipment that was coming in from overseas that wasn't actually stainless, and brewers having issues with that. Are there things that you're seeing on this subcommittee that should give people pause, or not really?
Yeah, I think education and asking questions is critically important. I think as a brewer, especially with the the trend of brewing, beers that are tartar or have fruit in them, or, a lot of yeast in them, the liner of the can, the material that's used to line the can, is really the most critical thing to pay attention to. And in the United States, most of the can manufacturers have transitioned their can liner material to a material that doesn't contain BPA, which was a component of can liners for a long time, but California's declared it a carcinogen. So the can manufacturers have been pulling that material out, and it's changed the liner and the integrity of the liner in low pH solutions or high yeast count beers is suspect sometimes. And so, with the getting cans from another country, they're not very transparent about what material they're using as liner material. And so, as a brewer, you need to ask.
Can bottles make a comeback?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to see it, even though we don't have a bottling line really. We've got a small one that we do the barrel aged beers on, but I'm an old purist in some ways, and I still think a beer bottle is the way to grab a beer. I think there's been an increase. I know for a fact that some of the larger craft brewers in the country who have both can lines and bottle lines are renewing their emphasis on bottles because of the shortages.
I was going to say, yeah, it's out of necessity in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's driven by the supply issues with the cans for sure. But maybe bottles will make a comeback, which to me is not a bad thing. I think a bottle's a great package.
If you're though for your brewery, where people maybe don't know your past, or where you've worked, which had embraced bottles and still do in a lot of ways, if New Realm was to come out with 12-ounce bottles of lager or 12-ounce bottles of IPA, do you think they would sell? Or do you think you'd get a lot of people who just, suddenly didn't think you were craft anymore?
Well, so two part question. No, I don't think we'd have a lot of success with them, just because everybody in Georgia's 100% cans right now. So I think we'd struggle to get shelf space if we started coming out with a line of beers and bottles. I don't think it's because people look at bottles as not being craft, but I do think that the what's happened with cans. I don't think you can really swim upstream with that, against that, and I think you got to kind of roll with it.
You are. I'm starting to think. I'm noticing the time, and I don't want to keep you too much longer. But you are a musician as well as a brewer, and I love that your bio on the New Realm website boasts your 50,000 plus song music collection, as well as pointing out that you are a guitar rocking band member on there. So I'm imagining that you wrote this bio yourself. So I'm curious as to the relationship between beer and music as you see it.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's funny because I really haven't been playing much, and I'm a hobby guitarist. I make no pretensions of
I'm sorry.
being
This says clearly in black and white that you are a guitar rocking band member himself. So
yeah. When that was written,
I have to
yes, I
believe
was.
everything I read on the internet. All right, it's yeah.
um, I love to play guitar. I absolutely love it. I don't claim to be good, but it is one of my passions outside of beer. And I've always thought something about craft beer and music, live music, always seemed to really click for me. I remember, way back in the day, I went to a Grateful Dead concert, right? And I'm out in the parking lot with everybody else. And there were people walking around with coolers of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and Anchor Steam beer. And I was like, you know what? That's really cool. That's really great. And I don't know. It's just, music is one of the finer things in life, and craft beer is one of the finer things in life. And I just think, I've had a lot of really fun music experience playing music with other brewers, and that's been great fun. Just kind of getting together and talking about something other than beer, and something that we all had a passion for. And we had a band at Stone. That was made up of everybody in the band worked at Stone, and it was crazy fun because everybody was coming in with different musical tastes, and we played everything. I mean, we were all over the place, and it was just fun. And then of course, if you're playing music and you can drink a couple of your own beers while doing it, that's a pretty nice thing.
So wait, so New Realm was the Yoko that took you out of the band and broke up the band. Is that?
Well, I think COVID is the Yoko. I, I just moved to Atlanta in August of 2019 full time, and I was in the process of trying to get to know people that were musicians and play music with people, and then COVID hit, and that all just went out the window. So I think once we get past this disease and people getting sick, I will definitely revisit that and try to get back into playing music with other people.
There's a vaccine in the works.
Yep.
The news today is that we could start seeing a vaccine next week, which is when this episode is going to air. If the world can get back to normal and we can get on airplanes again and go to far-flung places or just down the street, is there a beer bar? Is there someplace that you've been missing that you're really looking forward to getting back to and settling into?
Well, I think I spent 14 years in California. I'd love to be able to go back to California and visit all my old haunts. Um, I want to get back to London. That's really high on my list. I absolutely love London, England, and pub culture and everything about it. I'd love to take. I haven't been to Germany since I left Stone, and I'd love to, get to Munich, and I've never really explored Munich as much as I should have. And that, so I've got these several bucket list kind of things going on, but I would say for me, Denver, California, London, England are probably at the top of my list of places I need to get to as soon as this is all over.
Have you enjoyed being grounded And I mean this in a complimentary and curious way, but you were one of those guys who were traveling all the time, whether or not commuting from San Diego to Atlanta and back. But then also when you were at Stone, you were opening up Virginia and Berlin, and you had a hand in Shanghai too, didn't you? Or why am I blanking on the China brewery? Was it China?
No, I didn't. That happened after I left.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you were bouncing all over the place and also speaking at conferences and going to international festivals to judge beer and everything. Have you enjoyed being home and grounded these last couple of months?
Yeah, there's part of me that's really enjoyed being home. I told my wife, Kathleen, a few weeks ago, I said, I think as a family, we've grown closer because I'm home. Our kids are not in college away from the house. We've hunkered down at home and trying to make the best of a really tough situation. That aspect of it, I have enjoyed. I've enjoyed being able to go home every night and sleep in my own bed and have dinner at my own dinner table and not have to eat out. And eating out is great, and that's probably the biggest thing that my family and I miss. With this whole thing is, just sitting in a restaurant and getting great food and great drinks. But, that aspect of it, I have enjoyed. I've enjoyed spending more time with my family and hanging out in my new house and, really getting to kind of know the neighborhood and the house. And, that's, silver lining,
Yeah. All right. Before I let you go, what's a beer in the tanks, or what's a beer that you're planning on that when we can all travel again, that we should belly up to your bar and drink?
Oh my gosh. We've got, oh boy, let me think about this. So we've got a lot of beers in the works. That's why I'm struggling to, we're coming out with our latest barrel aged beers right now, over the next couple of months. So we're starting to pull all those out of wood. We've got, Doomsday Hound, which is our Imperial Stout that we put into brand new Templeton rye barrels that I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
And we've got a Belgian Tripel that we put into gin barrels that I'm really excited about. And, it's those kind of things. As far as our regular offerings, we're gearing up to do Radagast IPA, which is our triple IPA that we only do once a year. That's one of my favorite beers that we do. So, it's and the regular Doomsday Hound Imperial Stout is coming out right after Christmas. So that's a great beer. I'm really happy with that beer.
I feel like triple IPAs and Imperial Stouts is exactly what Georgia's going to need right after Christmas and in early January. So
I hope you're right.
Yeah, good planning on your part with the Senate runoff. Mitch, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's always fun to talk to you.
That's Mitch Steele of New Realm Brewing. Their lager, United, by the way, scored the number 2 spot on this year's Wine Enthusiast magazine Top 25 Beers of the Year. You can check out that list at winemag.com. And before we go, a bit of housekeeping. Make sure to head over to Facebook and join the This Week in Rausch Beer group. There's always something smoky going on. And if beer audio is your thing, make sure you listen to the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch for deep dive conversations with interesting brewery owners and more. And also head over to beeredge.com for articles and to sign up for our newsletter. Every Monday, look for new episodes of Steal This Beer, and once a month, on the 15th, download the BYO Nano podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe to this show and to leave a review. You can always reach me via email at johnholl, that's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or on Twitter at John_Hall. You know it, Nate Schweber, he does the music. He's got a new album out that's called Gaps, and you can find that on nateschweber.bandcamp.com. Download it today. Support your local musicians. Support your local arts. Jeff Quinn, speaking of artists, he designed our logo. As promised, Justin Clark of Cigar City Brewing is back with me on the phone right now. Cigar City Brewing is this episode's sponsor, and we have our thanks to them for that. Justin, we've been talking about fancy papers, and I'm curious about the inspiration for the name of this Hazy IPA.
Yeah, certainly. It is a nod to to the past when Tampa was the cigar rolling capital of the world. The fancy papers were the embossed labels that manufacturers would use on their cigar boxes and the rings to identify the brands of the cigars. So we thought it would just be a nice little nod to the past when Tampa was the cigar rolling capital of the world. And so we named Fancy Papers to help tell that little story every time somebody is drinking one of our hazy IPAs.
I like it. That's on brand for you guys. We can't talk about an IPA without mentioning the hops. So what's in this?
Yeah, this is Strata, Sabro, Idaho 7. All of those are used in kettle and dry hop.
Nice. And the stats on this beer?
It is 6.5% ABV, 60 IBUs, and 18 original gravity.
Awesome. That's Justin Clark of Cigar City Brewing, which is this episode's sponsor. To learn more about Fancy Papers and all of the other Cigar City beers, go visit cigarcitybrewing.com. I'm John Hall. New episodes of this show release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer. Thanks for listening.